Random House Audiobooks presents Comfort Me with Apples by Ruth Reichl. Read for you by the author.
Comfort me with apples. More adventures at the table. According to A.J. Liebling, the primary requisite for writing well about food is a good appetite. Easy for him to say. He was independently wealthy. Personally, I found the primary requisite for writing about food to be a credit card. And that was a problem. I pictured myself sweeping into fabulous restaurants to dine upon caviar and champagne. Maitre d's would cower before the great restaurant critic. Chefs would stand behind the kitchen door trembling. "What is she saying?" they would whisper to my waiter. "Does she like it?" I would not betray, by word or gesture, my opinion of the meal, and when it was all over, I would throw down my card and cry, "Charge it, please," then gather my retinue and float regally out the door. Unfortunately, the first time I tried this, I hit a few snags. In 1978, San Francisco's fanciest French restaurant belonged to a chef who had cooked for the Kennedys. The valet stared at my beat-up Volvo and shook his head. He could not, he insisted, accept a car that used a screwdriver in place of a key. The maitre d'hotel was equally overjoyed by my arrival. He looked me up and down, took in my thrift store clothing, and led me straight to the worst table, the one that shook each time a waiter came out the kitchen door. The sommelier appeared worried when I ordered the 61 Lascombe. He had, he was sorry to inform me, sold the last bottle. He was certain that a nice little Beaujolais would make me very happy. And when the captain announced that the special of the evening was freshly made terrine de foie gras, he pointedly told me the price. The biggest humiliation, however, was yet to come. "Your credit card, madam," said the maitre d'hotel frostily, "has been rejected." "It couldn't be," I insisted. "I just got it yesterday." "It says, madam," the maitre d'hotel went on, "that you are over your limit." He leaned down and hissed menacingly, "Do you know what your limit is?" Unfortunately, I did. After years of righteous poverty, I was prepared to sacrifice my principles and leap back into middle-class life. The middle class, however, had its doubts about me. Although I was now a bona fide restaurant critic, the banks were not impressed. Where, they wanted to know, were my debts? How had I managed to live 30 years without owing anything to anyone? How could I possibly be trusted with a credit card? In desperation, I put on my very best dress and arranged for an appointment with the bank manager. After making me wait a suitable length of time, he graciously permitted me to show him the masthead of New West magazine. I was hoping that my association with New York Magazine's West Coast sibling would impress this man, that he would recognize it as San Francisco's most important regional magazine. But the manager merely looked bored. As he unhurriedly put on his half-glasses, I wished that I had tamed my hair out of its usual wildness. I patted vainly at it and tried pulling the most excitable curls behind my ears. He scanned the list of contributing editors. He noted my name. He grunted. "Meaningless," he said at last. "What we are looking for is something to show that you will pay your bills. Can you show me a pay stub?" "I'm freelance," I stammered. "I don't get a paycheck. They pay me by the article." He drew visibly back from me. He looked sorrowful. "Unreliable," he sighed at last, staring at my ringless fingers. "It says here," he said, peering skeptically at the papers in his hand, "that you're married? To a Mr. Douglas Hollis?" "Yes," I replied, "I am." "And what does Mr. Hollis do for a living?" he inquired. "His income does not seem to be represented here." "He's an artist," I said. "He does site sculpture. He actually hasn't had much income in the past couple of years, but that's about to change." "I understand," he said firmly, and made a mark on the paper. Despite his name, Mr. Hollis was clearly no more trustworthy than myself. After months of pleading, the bank was finally persuaded to part with a Visa card. If I proved conscientious and faithful in my payments, the manager suggested, I might, in due time, be permitted a bit more credit. We would have to see. In the meantime, he was prepared to go out on a $250 limb. It was not enough. I was not surprised. I had known from the start that this job would be trouble. I had been writing short magazine articles for a couple of years, but nobody I knew took them seriously. They were considered, like my restaurant job, just a sideline to support my real work as a novelist. Fixing the money part turned out to be easy. I wrote the fancy French restaurant a check and asked my editor for an advance. The rest would be more complicated. On the day I became a restaurant critic, my main emotion was fear. As I drove home from the magazine, I practiced breaking the news to the people I loved best. I found the prospect so terrifying that I forgot to be frightened of the bridge, and I reached the far side of the bay before realizing that I had crossed the entire span without my usual panic. I turned off the freeway, and as my ancient car bumped through the Berkeley flatlands, I tried to find the perfect way to put it. I've just gotten the best job in the world. As I heard myself say the words, I knew they wouldn't do. They would be fine in San Francisco or New York, but this was the People's Republic of Berkeley. This was the heart of the counterculture. Every single person I knew was going to disapprove. I walked into the hallway of the peeling Victorian house I shared with my husband and 5 other people and waited for their reactions. Nick, our household patriarch, was sitting in the shabby, crowded living room. He stroked the bushy beard that gave him the air of a prophet and said, "Let me get this straight. You're going to spend your life telling spoiled rich people where to eat too much obscene food?" "Something like that," I murmured, too embarrassed to defend myself. He shook his head in disappointment. A devotee of millet and Dr. Bronner's balanced mineral bouillon, Nick had done his Berkeley best to turn our household into a model of politically correct consumption. We had, at various times, been ovo-lacto-vegetarians and vegans, and we were, at all times, vigilant about the excesses of agribusiness. Nick had valiantly tried to overlook my forays into the world of fancy food, but this was going too far. For the first time in the many years I had known him, he became speechless. Jules, the most sympathetic member of our household, tried to be optimistic. He poured himself a glass of wine from the gallon jug on the table and said, "Free meals." He turned to Nick and said, "Think how our food bills will go down." Nick shook his head. "Not mine," he said. "You couldn't pay me to set foot in one of those decadent bourgeois institutions. Have you told Doug?" "Not yet," I admitted, going out to the garage where my husband was working on the bandsaw. He had sawdust in his straight brown hair, and when he saw me he smiled, as if just the sight of me had improved his day. He turned off the saw, leaned against it, shook a Camel out of the pack that was always in his shirt pocket, and lit it. "The magazines asked me to be their restaurant critic," I blurted out. "Of course they have," he said, putting his arms around me. Doug was my biggest fan and greatest supporter. I buried my head in his faded blue work shirt and inhaled his scent, a mixture of clean laundry, cut wood, and tobacco. Why wouldn't they? You're a great cook and a great writer, but you don't have to say yes. I stood back so I could see him. He has one of those handsome, all-American faces that gets better as it ages, and in our 11 years together his cheeks had slimmed down, become angular. His youthful rosiness had disappeared, leaving him looking chiseled, intelligent, and kind. Now he said earnestly, "Why don't you stop working? I'm making enough money now. You could quit the restaurant, give up magazine work, and stay home and write." "That would be great," I hedged, "but you don't understand. I really want to do this." "Why?" he asked. "You're wasting your talent." "I don't have to do it forever," I replied, "but I think it'll be good experience." "You'll be stuck here," he said with such vehemence that I understood there was something more on his mind. "Look, I'm getting commissions all over the country, and I thought you'd bring your typewriter and come with me. We'd be together." I was never very good at playing the great artist's wife, remember? I reminded him. After the third art patron chucks me under the chin and says condescendingly, "And what do you do, dear?" I always get mad. Even if I didn't have this new job, I probably wouldn't come with you all that often. "So don't come," he said in his soft, reasonable voice. "Stay here."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?